All right. Well, good afternoon, and we will be recording the webinar. So if you prefer not to have your camera on, please feel free to turn it off. And we want to welcome you to the Renewable Energy Speaker Series hosted by the McNeil Center for Applied Renewable Energy, or CARE, here at Concordia University of Edmonton, or as we refer to it as CUE. The speaker series provides us all an opportunity to explore renewable energy solutions, learn about the challenges faced by the sustainable energy sector. We learn about different careers, as well as interact with experts from across Canada and beyond. Before we begin today's webinar, I would like to acknowledge that Concordia University of Edmonton is located on Indigenous lands and territories now called Treaty 6 territory, and the homeland of the Métis Nation, District 9. The North Saskatchewan River has been a significant place for the Blackfoot, Dene, Nakota Sioux, Cree, Saulteaux, and Métis since time immemorial. We honor and respect the agreements made by our ancestors to live in good relations for as long as the sun shines, the grass grows, and the river flows. As mentioned, we will be recording the webinar, and the recording will be posted on our website for you to refer to at a later time if you'd like. I'd also like to ask everyone to please keep their microphones muted to avoid any background noise. Today's webinar is titled The Short List of Climate Actions That Will Work, and our speaker is Mr. Michael Barnard. Michael works with executives, investors, and policymakers to navigate the pathways towards decarbonization. He helps make sense of complex transitions by combining insights from physics, economics, and human systems, turning them into practical strategies and clear opportunities. His work spans sectors from sustainable building materials and aviation fuels to grid storage and logistics, always with an eye on how they fit together in the larger picture of the clean economy. Informed by projects across North America, Asia, and Latin America, his perspective is both global and grounded in real-world application. Michael shares his thinking through regular publications on technology trends, innovation, and policy frameworks, not as final answers, but as contributions to an ongoing conversation about building a sustainable future. So after Michael's presentation, I will come back on here to facilitate the question and answer period. But for now, Michael, over to you.
Thank you, Carla. Let's just get right into it. I've been iterating this material for close to a decade, and so you're getting the most recent version of my talking points around this. Let's start out with electrify everything. You've seen this before. You've heard that before, but what does that mean and why is it so important? So this is a Sankey diagram invented by a Scottishman with an impossibly long first name, so I won't bother to try to remember it. Sankey diagrams show flows through systems. In this case, primary energy comes in on the left, and energy services occur, transformations and services occur, and then it flows out to rejected energy and useful energy. The rejected energy is what I want to draw your attention to. A fossil fuel-based system like ours burns fossil fuels to do work, to create heat, to do all the things we do. And unfortunately, that comes with a lot of waste heat. We don't get nearly as much out of the fuels as we perhaps think we do. So one of the key things we want to think about is how do we become more efficient as a society in a very specific way? Electrifying everything inverts this. A Canada that was based on renewables flowing through the electricity grid into industrial, residential, commercial, and transportation flows still delivers all 1,000 terawatt hours or so, but the rejected energy plummets to a couple of hundred terawatt hours. That's because renewables to the grid, to electric vehicles, to heat pumps is vastly more efficient. One of the things that we tend to hear is we have to replace all this energy on the left, and that's just not the case. You'll notice this crude oil and natural gas. Well, the amount of energy that flows into rejected energy from those two flows is quite extraordinary. It makes it look, in this case, like hydro, wind, solar, and biomass are not as big in relationship to what we need to do as they actually are. And so electrifying everything really is focused on delivering the energy services that we need. And there's no hair shirts here. For anybody who's driven a Tesla, you know there aren't that many shortcomings to modern electric cars. For anybody who's got a heat pump, you know they work. For anybody who's got an induction stove, you know they work just fine to crisp bacon or whatever you want to do. This isn't a world, an electrified world isn't a world in which we are short of anything. It's just the air is cleaner, climate change is being acted upon, and it's also a quieter world. So we can listen to our music as loud as we want. The next kind of short list action is overbuild renewable generation. All the modeling says, well, we're going to have some curtailed generation, but overbuilding by a bit gives us some flexibility. And let's put this in context. We actually, except for nuclear, we have overbuilt everything. We don't run our gas plants. We didn't run our coal plants at 100% capacity. Some gas plants run at 10% per year because their entire business model is turning on when there's a shortage of electricity during peaks. This, by the way, is a picture I took last summer in the Netherlands when I was assisting them with their 2050 pragmatic energy scenario for the country. This is a gigawatt scale wind, solar, and battery farm. Offshore wind outside the dike, 7.5 megawatt capacity, concrete mast, turbines, and solar panels inside the dike, along with a bunch of batteries, all behind a single grid connection to buffer it. It's a hybrid energy in the future. Amusingly, it's also 5 meters below sea level because it's the Netherlands. So we're going to be overbuilding renewable generation as part of what we do, and we're going to be not using it, not taking full advantage of it, just like we do with our existing generation assets. Another key piece is building continent-scale grids and markets for electricity. We've been a little lax on that in Canada. They're doing much better in India, Pakistan, China. They're doing better. They're starting to do better at that in Europe. I've been participating with an NGO that's Brussels-based in working towards them uploading grid architecture for the entire continent to the EU level, and they're progressing that through this year. But this chart is actually from a Chinese-led organization, GEIDCO, GEIDCO, the Global Energy Integration Development Cooperative and something. Too many things in the acronym. This is one of their visions for a globally integrated HVDC grid, something they've been bringing forward for years. And they're building parts of it. Some of the HVDC in Pakistan and other places was built under the Belt and Road Initiative. So, while we have a bit of a shortcoming in the West, the rest of the world is progressing. One of the things that GEIDCO participated in Africa was an Africa-China-led study of a 12-country, 10,000-kilometer HVDC supergrid. Quite amazing. And we're also going to be using a lot of modern grid-enhancing technologies that enable us to get a lot more out of the wires that we have, or replace the wires that we have with advanced conductors that can carry a lot more electricity around. Now, that breadth of grid means that if we have surplus electrons in one place because the wind is blowing and the sun is shining, and there's a deficit somewhere else, we can just move the electrons to them. Electrons, move at the speed of light, effectively, and so getting electricity across a country just requires wires. It's a lot faster than a pipeline, a lot more responsive. And amusingly, I'm also involved in a project which tracks a bit of history. In 1865, we put the first communication cable across the Atlantic from Newfoundland to Ireland. And I'm involved with the NATO L project peripherally, which intends to do that with a 6 gigawatt HVDC cable, enabling us to take advantage of surplus European electricity when we need it, and enabling them to take advantage of surplus Canadian electricity when they need it. Strong neighbors across the Atlantic. The next thing is building pumped hydro and other storage. This is a screenshot from the Australian National University Greenfield Pump Storage facility. And their pump storage is specifically closed loop off river. So it doesn't go on rivers, doesn't go on streams. It is a reservoir 400 meters or higher, reservoir, and another reservoir at the base, and penstocks between them, and the water just goes back and forth. There is far more resource in North America than we actually need, and it's scattered quite widely. I've done the assessment for Saskatchewan, for example, and there is pumped hydro facilities, believe it or not, available in even Saskatchewan. And to be clear, I'll remind you, transmission. We are going to have transmission crossing the countries, crossing the continents to enable that pumped hydro to be filled and be fulfilling needs 1,000 kilometers away, similar to what they do in many places. One of the things I like to say about this is, if you want to see what we should be building at scale, look at China, at least in part, for clean technology. They've got 365 gigawatts of pumped hydro in operation, under construction, or in plan to start construction by 2030. That represents about 14 terawatt hours of electricity of storage in there. Now, of course, grid-based batteries are going great guns. They're being deployed across the world quite rapidly, and they're a key part of the technology as well. This, with transmission and a bit of overbuilding renewables, enables us to have all the energy we need when we need it. But it's not just energy that we need to solve climate change. We need to fix how we deal with nature. And one of the core actions is planting a lot of trees. There's and they have big secondary benefits. There's a great green wall going across sub-Saharan Africa to prevent the spread of the Sahara. There's reforestation efforts going on globally. China has reforested an amount of land that's much bigger than the size of France, for example, since 1990. And to be clear, that was in the Mao era, they deforested much of China. So they are correcting past wrongs that they did. This image is from a study that came out of a Swiss research institute, which showed that we had removed about 3 of the 6 trillion trees that used to exist on Earth. So adding 1 trillion trees is just partially redressing something in the past. But it's not the only answer. We have to restore wetlands. We have to soften coastlines. We have to restore grasslands. Restoring nature's drawdown approaches is a core part of our solution. But to be clear, it's not a core part of our 2050 solution. This is something that's necessary for 2200. We have to restore that to draw down CO2 over decades and centuries, because we put far too much of it into the atmosphere, and we have to slow that change. On an associated note, we have to change agricultural practices. This is a spray drone. They are now used globally to spray products onto fields, but they spray a lot less because they're much more efficient. They use precision agriculture with GPSs and computers to put exactly the right amount of product in exactly the right spot at the right time without soil compaction. And that includes spot applications of fertilizer during the growing season. The estimates coming out of North American studies show a 30 to 50% reduction in fertilizer use with drone spraying. A couple of these drones, with 14 feet wingspans and 200 pounds of product, 2 of them can replace a $700,000 John Deere tractor, $700,000 John Deere tractor, spraying as much as they do. In China, where agricultural fields are smaller and often terraced, DJI, the world's biggest drone company, indicates that they're spraying a full third of the fields. It is a major thing, and it enhances soil productivity. Not the only thing, though. Ammonia-based fertilizers are carbon bombs, both coming and going. We make them from natural gas with high emissions in making the ammonia. And then when they're put on the fields, they degrade. Simple ammonia-based fertilizers degrade into nitrous oxides with carbon dioxide equivalent intensities of 265 times that of CO2. And they're long-lived. So we have to reduce our ammonia-based fertilizer use, which we can do through precision agriculture. We have to use special compositions of ammonia-based fertilizers that degrade more slowly so they don't turn into nitrous oxides. We have to use, and we have to make green fertilizer. We also have to move more towards low tillage agriculture because that preserves carbon in the soil rather than having it be re-emitted to the atmosphere when we do tillage. Next, we need to fix concrete, steel, and industrial processes. This is, if you're wondering what a climate futurist does, this is a decade-by-decade projection of the solution, a scenario of solution for cement and concrete for the entire world through 2100 that I put together. I think I published this one last year, including I've got a report out on cement. But there's a lot of solutions for cement. Mass timber or engineered hardwood, is basically plywood on steroids, now being used to build up to 50-story buildings, is a key one. 5 times the strength of reinforced concrete, per ton, much lighter, embodies a ton of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, breathing in the carbon dioxide, breathing out the oxygen, keeping the carbon as a structural material. But it's not the only one. We're also entering a period of population decline. We're going to hit peak population in the world between 2050 and 2070. We're going to be reusing more buildings. We're going to be using things like finite element analysis to minimize the structural material required for a building. Software that's now available, as software as a service globally. So everybody in the world who's entering into a building boom is going to be doing it as efficiently as possible. We use geopolymers and epoxies. There's a whole raft of solutions that are in this. And there's similar ones for steel. For steel, we are entering into a period when we're going to be using a lot more scrap steel. And that scrap steel increasingly is going to be coming from fossil fuel infrastructure in the coming decades as we shut down much of our fossil fuel industry. Not all of it. We're still going to be making petrochemicals, but we're not going to be using it as fuel nearly as much in the future, obviously for obvious reasons. So there are solutions for these technologies. They're being deployed today. China is pivoting to electric arc furnaces with scrap as an example. We're cleaning up aluminum processing globally. It's everywhere I look, I find solutions. But those solutions are frequently a bit more expensive. There is no incentive for people to change. So we have to price carbon aggressively. For better or for worse, Canada has removed its consumer carbon tax, but we still have our industrial carbon tax, and part of the policy of the government has been to enhance and strengthen that. We'll see how that works out, but it is a key part of making it cost effective for people to change and cost ineffective to remain unchanged. Luckily on this, the EU with its carbon border adjustment mechanism, which was initiated a few years ago, but started actually requiring payments this year in 2026, is carbon pricing the world. The EU is the world's largest trading bloc. It does more trade than China or the United States, and it's one of the 3 economic centers of the world. And it's pricing carbon and everything that crosses its border. Everything we ship to Europe is going to be subject to that. And so if you want to sell to one of the 3 biggest economic blocs in the world, you need to be, and you want to be cost competitive, you need to decarbonize what you're selling. And so pricing carbon aggressively is necessary for the economic solution for climate change. We're seeing that quite a lot of places. Obviously, we have our own version of it. There is a carbon price on hydrofluorocarbons in the States, believe it or not, although not on methane or CO2. There is a carbon price in China. There are carbon prices in the majority of countries in the world. So we are progressing down the path of doing this. They are inadequate at this point. they have to increase because the cost of emitting is still too low. That's why we need a full regulatory and policy basket. Now, some of you presumably are in Ontario, which did this intentionally. In the 2000s, the McGuinty government said, you know what? This coal is making our babies sick because of its emissions, and it's a problem, and we can do something about it. And so they did. They shut down coal plants in Ontario. I was living there during that period, on and off. And I'll tell you, bad air days in Ontario and Toronto were bad air days. We had 55 unsafe air days in Ontario in the late 1990s. When they finally finished shutting down coal, that dropped to zero. And it also eliminated 37 million tons of CO2 annually from Canada's emissions. That's the single biggest emission reduction action that has occurred in Canada to date, and one of the bigger ones in the world. When I was doing this with, working through this with India last year, or 2 years ago in a long seminar series, one of the things I did is I looked at all the coal plants in India and said, which ones are the oldest, the highest emitting, which ones are the closest to population centers, then suggested a staggered closure rate so that they would get rid of the worst ones for human health and for emissions first and defer the other ones to later. And so that's what I mean by shut them down strategically. You can't just turn them off. We still need the electricity. There's still value propositions, but we need to have a plan for getting rid of them. And on that note, we really should stop giving the fossil fuel industry free public money. It is remarkable to me how long this has been going on. In 2009, the OECD, the Organization of Economic, I forget what OECD stands for, but overlaps strongly with the G20. They all committed, including Canada, to shutting down subsidies for fossil fuel. And what we found as we tried to do that was they're everywhere. They're in every line item of everything. The lobbyists and fossil fuel oriented people had made sure that it was a Gordian knot of subsidies for fossil fuels. It's incredibly hard to unwind them. The Trudeau government did some work, got some progress, but it stalled. National Resources Canada should have better been known as Oil, Gas, and Coal Canada, and they were resistant for a long time. So now NRCan has become much more of a, natural resources that aren't oil, gas, and coal as much. And so we're continuing to make progress on this, but we still have massive subsidies for this. As an example, the Trans Mountain Pipeline, the expansion of that ended up costing $34 billion. But the contracted rates per barrel for Alberta's crude oil flowing through the Trans Mountain were negotiated before the price increases, and the rates per barrel have stayed the same. Canada is currently subsidizing exports of Alberta's crude to the tune of $2.5 to $3 billion a year. With the unfortunate stuff that's going on in Iran and the Strait of Hormuz right now, the headlines about major bonuses for Alberta's oil, well, that comes with taxpayers paying more for transit of the pipeline. And so that's just one of many, many places where the oil and gas industry is getting a free ride. And here's a question for Canadians. Think about this for a second. What percentage of Canada's GDP, gross domestic product, does the oil and gas industry provide? When somebody asked a set of people at a business school this recently, they thought 30 to 50%. But it's actually 5%. It's only 5% of our gross domestic product. It looms much larger in the narratives that are being promoted than it does in reality. We can do without it, and we will do without it in the future. Next, we're going to deal with refrigerants and methane, and we have long history for this. So this is a picture of the healed ozone layer, which is a great news story and shows that we can do this. a long time ago, they realized there was a problem with chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs, in hairspray and shaving cream and a bunch of other places, was that they were destroying the ozone layer and turning Australia not into a sunburnt country, but a deeply more problematic skin cancer country. And we needed to fix that for planetary health and for human health and for the health of the wildlife. And we did. The Montreal Protocol on substances that damage the ozone layer, brought in with, signed in Montreal. Unfortunately, the solution turned out to be globally hydrofluorocarbons, HFCs. So that replaced the CFCs. And some smart, nerdy guy, probably, or one, was probably putting up their hand saying, hey, these hydrofluorocarbons are high global warming potential. Maybe we should be looking at something besides HFCs. And they were ignored. Now, HFCs are a major problem with up to 4,100 times the climate change impact of CO2 per ton. And so that's a problem. Now we have the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol on substances that harm the ozone layer, signed in 2015 in Kigali, Rwanda. And it says, okay, now we've got to deal with the HFCs. What are we going to replace them with? So now we're replacing them with HFOs, and we're replacing them with propane, and we're replacing them with ammonia, and things which have a global warming potential that's much lower. Canada seems to be following the United States into something which is still higher global warming potential than I would like, but that was 2 years ago. Now, our alignment with the United States is different than it used to be. Methane is another problem. I've spoken to Rob Jackson, who runs the Global Carbon Project, which publishes annual budgets on every greenhouse gas going. And methane, the stuff that burns in natural gas, is quite bad. It's about 89 times as bad as CO2e on a 20-year time frame, and 30 times as bad on a 100-year time frame. And we emit a lot of it. From biological sources, human biological sources, farming and waste dumps and landfills and agricultural waste, hog manure pits, we emit more from that than the oil and gas industry does in total. But there are solutions for it. A lot of it comes out of livestock, but there's a seaweed supplement that reduces ungulates methane burps by 60 to 80%. And it works, and it's proven. It's a once a week feed supplement. It's not that expensive. As we carbon price methane, which Canada does and which the EU does, that becomes very cost effective. We can put bubblers under hog manure ponds. We divert waste biomass to make biomethane for strategic energy reserves and to do direct reduction of iron, using methane, but biological instead. And we have solutions for all of that as well. Next up, we need to ignore some distractions. Nuclear generation, including small modular reactors, is distraction. This chart is something that I started doing, in 2014, the first time. So it's a 12-year project, kind of keeping an eye on it. What it does is it compares the growth of renewables versus nuclear in China. It's a natural experiment. It takes it out of all the arguments in the West about environmentalists making too much regulatory burdens on nuclear, and says, okay, let's go to a place where they don't have those Western problems, and see what they do, see how they succeed. Now, China's had a nuclear program for 70 years. It's been working to develop nuclear reactors and build them for 70 years. It has had a wind and solar program since the early 2000s. And so I started in 2014 because the wind and solar program had been around for a decade. It was mature. The nuclear program had been around for decades. It was mature. And I felt that was a reasonable time to start. And this is the total number of annual new terawatt hours provided by each technology set since then. I've got it year by year by year. I update the set. And as you can see, renewables are going up in an exponential curve, and nuclear is a flat line along the bottom. This matters because China eats mega projects for mid-morning snacks between real meals. If they can't scale nuclear fast, then I don't think anybody else can. So the conditions for, I published extensively on the conditions for success for new nuclear, which is a great 1970s technology, low carbon, low pollution, safe, but it's too expensive and too slow to build. Personally, I believe that most nuclear projects and support in the West is predatory delay by conservatives who are no longer allowed to say they don't believe in climate change and have to have a climate solution. It's not a climate solution. I'm happy for every nuclear plant that gets built, but it's a distraction. Similarly, hydrogen as an energy carrier. Here's another climate futurist chart. This is a projection through 2100 of global demand for hydrogen. You'll notice demand goes down, and there's good reasons for that, right? 40% of hydrogen today is used to crack, hydrotreat and desulfurize crude oil in refineries. And we're going to be doing a lot less of that. Secondarily, as we move to a decarbonized world, we're going to be making petrochemicals more than anything else. That doesn't require heavy sour crude like the stuff from Alberta or Venezuela or Mexico. It's better, it prefers light sweet crude, low sulfur, less viscous crude. The heavy sour crude from Alberta and other places is what needs the most hydrogen. So that big chunk is going down. I mentioned we've got to deal with fertilizers. Well, guess what? If we're reducing the use of fertilizers through precision agriculture and a whole bunch of other stuff like making biomethane for strategic energy reserves, but that leaves the NPK fertilizers behind in the digestate for spreading in the fields. We used to actually take biomass and return the core stuff to the fields. We've stopped doing that. We have to start doing that again. So there are solutions there. But if we look at all the places that use hydrogen that are smaller uses, well, green hydrogen is going to be more expensive. And there's just a real simple guns and butters thing there is if a feedstock is more expensive, then alternatives to use of that feedstock become more economically viable. And so we're going to see a significant reduction in hydrogen demand there. And I'll be answering questions later. I can certainly talk about virgin steel making. Okay, carbon capture, use, and sequestration. So this is a chart I developed, I think, a decade ago now. The big bubble is the total amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, about 3,000 billion tons now. We've put in over 1,000 billion tons. We're adding 35 to 41 billion tons annually. And the total global market for carbon capture and use today is 230 million tons. It's the invisible dot on the bottom of that. It's a tiny amount. And 90 million of those 230 million tons are used for enhanced oil recovery, putting CO2 underground to get more oil out. And by the way, that is the CO2 comes from underground and then it's piped to where the oil wells are and put underground for enhanced oil recovery. So it's not really sequestration. We're extracting CO2 from underground to put it back underground. This is not an industry which can scale. Even the 10% of the problem that is expected that the scenarios provide for 2050 would require us building an infrastructure as large as the entire global fossil fuel infrastructure, but for waste disposal. That's not a realistic solution. And I've looked at every carbon capture and sequestration solution from direct air capture to other ones. Scaling a mechanical carbon capture and utilization is a distraction. We have to stop digging the hole with a steam shovel because carbon capture and sequestration is filling that hole in with a teaspoon. Lastly, pay attention to motivations. I'll just say that there are a lot of vested interests who don't want things to change. There are a lot of people who are trying to make money and will make absurd claims about what they're doing. There are a lot of consulting agencies, who love getting consulting fees to do big studies which prove what their clients want them to prove. I remember a couple of years ago, I looked at a DNV study. They're a major categorization firm, which, things have to be in the maritime industry or the oil and gas industry, the infrastructure industry, have to be built to their standards and specifications or they're uninsurable. And DNV also does consulting, and unsurprisingly does it with oil and gas firms. They were paid by the Pipeline Association of Europe to study making green hydrogen, and lo and behold, they found versus HVDC, and lo and behold, they found that it made a lot more sense to make green hydrogen offshore wind farms, put it in a pipeline and deliver it to Germany than just to deliver the electricity. It was a terrible report. And I've talked to insiders at DNV about it. We're all just, shaking our heads about how bad it was. There are a lot of bad reports out there. So pay attention to motivations. And that's the presentation. So let's have a chat.